Ahoy! The new World Aeternum devs have released what they call a living roadmap. That means we have a very clear outline for what to expect in the next season, and then some less clear outlines for what's in the seasons afterwards, but we have information on what they're planning to do. I'm going to show you the full thing right here, but there are plenty of details that we need to talk about. But I think it's important to point out right here that we can see a lot of content. That means that they're at least not looking to completely cease development on New World, and that was a serious concern depending on how the console release would go. So it seems like the console release went at least reasonably well. Before we start with Season 7, if you want to get early trading tips for any of this upcoming content, then consider supporting me on Patreon. Now, in Season 7, we first of all have one very big point, and that is the seasonal world system, starting with PvP worlds. Seasonal worlds last for 3 months and have unique rules. In Season 7, that'll be a world where you're always PvP flagged. It sounds like you're even PvP flagged before you choose your faction. The max level will also be different. The subtitles captioned it as level 15. I think it was meant to say level 50. And there will be unique sets of gear that can be crafted on these worlds that drop on death. A whole system will go along with that. So there are new resources that you can only get when wearing special gear, which again drops on death. And these resources can be used to craft gear that also drops on death, but can be very powerful. The gear is at least on par with artifacts or stronger, but this gear can even break, so it sounds like even if you get it and you don't drop it, there's a chance that after a while it just gets destroyed. The devs are describing this as feeling like New World Alpha with all the quality of life and content the game now has. Crafters will be necessary in these PvP worlds in order to even craft this unique gear. And since most of us have just done the MSQ, you can completely level by crafting as well without having to do the MSQ again. They say that rewards and progression will carry over after the season ends, ensuring their efforts are never lost. It's not quite clear where they are carrying though. It might just be that that character gets moved off to a normal server and then the next seasonal world begins. I think these super high aggression PvP servers could be extremely interesting depending on how they get executed. I especially like the level cap here, so you don't have to look for the normal late game gear, but instead the focus is much more on the PvP and maybe these new resources that you want to get along the way. So I think this definitely has the potential to be good, but I will say that obviously it's not as appealing for pure PvE players. A new OPR map is coming, but it's not quite here. What we're going to get during Season 7 is the OPR map preview, which apparently, from what it sounds like so far, will only be for a weekend, and then they want to get feedback from us for this map. I think it's cool that they're letting us test this early, but a single weekend doesn't sound particularly long. That sounds more like a test server thing. They also mentioned that more PvP modes and maps are coming, more on that a little bit later. Mutations get some upgrades. M3 difficulty can now be found through the matchmaker as well, like the other mutation levels already can. Additionally, all active mutations now share the same promotions, so you no longer need to reslot any gems in a single week if you're running different mutations. They would all be fire mutations, for example, which I think is very convenient if you want to run multiple different M3s per week without having individual gear sets for them and without wanting to swap the gems. There's also more of a reason to do them because they provide improved rewards now. There will be new crafting materials in expeditions and raids, and when combined you can craft new 725 gear score pieces. So there are some improvements for the PvE side of things as well. There are also 3 new daily solo trials for Empress Zhao, Isabella and Daichi Soto, but honestly, who cares? We get a bit of info about the combat balance changes. I think the time to kill is currently a little bit too long, so they're adjusting some consumables and some perks. Honestly, I feel like the time to kill in a bursty build right now is not particularly long, but we'll see where this goes. There will be balance changes around target lock, and one example here is that the blunderbuss damage nerf will be reversed, but in return it'll get extra inaccuracy during target lock, so that you will just hit less pellets in general. The hatchet will also see adjustments, but we don't have any info about what exactly is to come there. This could also possibly no longer be the case now that the hatchet is already kind of dropping off after the initial nerfs on the recent patch. There will be new artifacts and perks. We get 8 new artifacts, 7 of which are weapons and 1 is an earring. The gameplay they showed was an evade rapier, so maybe we get a counterpart to finisher. And they mentioned an ice gauntlet that gives you a large amount of regeneration at the end of Ice Tomb. They're working on some sort of seasonal events refresh, but it sounds like it's mainly just improving or upping the rewards for certain events like Legacy of Crassus, Siege of Sulphur and Rabbit's Revenge. From what I can tell, Season 7 won't be super heavy on content for existing characters. A lot of the focus seems to be on these seasonal worlds, which I think is to give them a bit more buffer to work on the late game content that they are lining up for after that. I personally don't have an issue with that because I think I'll enjoy those hyper-aggressive servers, but I understand that that won't be for everyone. So let's look further into the future. Before we do that, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. The next stage is labeled as In Development and is described as what is in active development and will be coming in upcoming seasons. These items will not necessarily be available in the immediate next season, but within a season or 2. That is the website description at least. The description on the roadmap itself says, in development, initiatives are actively being worked on with details and timelines to be determined. So I wouldn't expect all of this content to be guaranteed within 2 seasons, but it does seem like this would be mainly the content they're trying to work on until the next expansion or whatever's coming towards the end of next year. Here we're starting with new seasonal worlds, so the system will continue even after Season 7, and new endgame progression improvements. They didn't give us any details about this in the dev talk, but what we can see here is cross-character progression, including seasonal worlds, wraparound XP, and Umbrals V2. I wish they would have given us a few more details what exactly these things are. I've never heard of wraparound XP before. I guess you can kind of level again or something. Cross-character progression, also unclear what that involves. Umbrals V2 I can explain a little bit because some of you may not be aware what Umbrals even are. Umbral shards used to be a currency that allowed you to upgrade gear beyond the maximum gear score at which it could drop. So you could upgrade a 600 gear score piece to 625. I'm guessing they're doing the same for 700 gear score. The next point is absolutely huge. They're working on multiple new PvP modes and maps. And some details that they gave us, or some things that are testing at the moment, is potentially a capture the flag mode and potentially a battle royale mode. They're also considering seasonal game modes of some form or seasonal variants, like for example capture the flag with mounts or without mounts. But also they need to consider how to handle this and not simultaneously end up splitting the queues too much, because the more PvP modes you introduce, the more risk of splitting the queues too much you run, and then it's harder to find matches for any mode. There's definitely massive potential here. Personally, I hope that they're not gonna go for the Battle Royale mode and give us more traditional ones instead, which I think are better suited for New World. Invasions will likely see multiple changes. On one hand, they want to turn this into a mode that you can just queue or matchmake for, like an expedition or something, but on the other hand, they also want to increase the variety in evasions, for example potentially through mutation levels or other ways of increasing the difficulty. Fun fact, they talked about invasion mutations years ago, shortly after launch, as one of the things that they'd like to do, and then there was a very long radio silence on it, so it's interesting it's coming back now. They're planning to do various endgame improvements, which I'm going to summarize in the same way they did, because it kind of flows into each other as well. So they want to refresh older content so that it has more impact. For example, they want to have people have a reason to go back to Requarter. They somehow want to tie this into the territory system, the reputation system, so somehow you can build up your reputation and then you have in some way a reason to go craft in the location where you built the reputation. There are some potential new gameplay elements and new collections that you can get, and also a way to get high-end gear from crafting, like the already mentioned Mutated expeditions, but maybe also something else. It was a bit confusing, a bit unclear what they want to do there, but Requarter definitely seems to somehow play into it. They're aiming to make the perks a bit more even, so there's a bit more choice when it comes to gearing, a bit more horizontal progression maybe. And they're also considering to maybe give us more than one perk per ability, so you could use different perk mods to get different effects on a graph well, for example. They're thinking about potentially putting these perks in unique places, so you have to farm somewhat specific areas or mobs or whatever in order to get some specific perks. They emphasize here again that it is important to them that crafting has value again, and they will maybe also test some of these things in seasonal worlds first. Something else they're working on are pickup wars. This will not be a completely casual queue for wars, but instead companies can challenge other companies to a war. But it is without the stakes of a normal war, so this will be a perfect testing ground and also a place to try out new players, for example. I'm assuming it would likely also not have the normal merc restrictions. We already saw the first hints for it, but global storage is coming, and so is the barbershop, without any further details so far. That brings us to the third category, which is called In Exploration. These are described as ideas the dev team is discussing or exploring, but they're not guaranteed. At the same time, they also mentioned here this document does not include everything we are working on and is subject to change, so there are a few things they are maybe hiding from us too. They're testing out new weapons and actually prototyping multiple weapons at the same time. They are saying that those will be coming out at a more regular cadence in the future, which actually sounds more like a guarantee because they're saying it as this will be happening, but oh well, whatever that means. They mention multiple new raids, and they already said that they are planning to make the next raid really hard because the current one gets cleared in sub 20, sub 30 minutes at this point by some groups. They're also considering introducing raid difficulty levels, which I think would be great for a long-term challenge. The roadmap mentions a territory system overhaul without any details, an influence, a tower claim, and siege system with building. Very unclear how that is supposed to work. Really would have loved some more details on that one, but I guess it's in such early stages that they didn't really want to get our hopes up yet. All instanced content is planned to be available in the matchmaker somehow, which would imply that there would be casual wars as well eventually through that system. I'm not sure if that's what they're trying to imply here, but most other instance content is slowly moving into the matchmaker anyways. There are considerations for ranked PvP, which is difficult, and so far that you have to have enough of a player pool for that, so it only really works in some regions. They want to do procedural expeditions with extraction, which would be absolutely massive if they can make that happen, but that's a whole challenge of its own. Could be extremely interesting though if they actually pull that off. They want to add new PvE modes, which seems to be different from just the raid, and they want to add new exploration and collection systems. Problem here, in my opinion, is that the current achievement system is still not really fully fleshed out, so I'd rather see that polished first. They want to overhaul endgame rewards and systems, and they are considering zone up levels, because there are currently unused zones in the main story quest that could be turned into max level zones. They already mentioned Reekwater, but obviously that's not the only one. We, for example, also have Morningdale or Restless Shore. What's really interesting is in the case of Reekwater, they describe this as a more open world experience rather than just on-rails quest XP. I don't quite know what an open world experience would be to them. They mentioned the reputation framework again here, but they said that New World was always meant to be a sand park, and they've got the park now, but it needs more sandbox. In that context, or directly afterwards, they also mention the company hall with storage. And they say that any company can do it. You can build something and have a little slice of the world that they can own. I'm going to lean a fair bit out of the window here. I'm going to read between the lines really hard. But it almost sounds like they are considering to bring back the original company build system. Between them mentioning that they want to have a more open world experience, they want to have more sandbox and all that, specifically in Reekwater apparently, and then mentioning the company hall right afterwards, it feels like they might be wanting to give us a maybe condensed version, maybe not quite as creative version of that, where you're building your own base to some degree in Reekwater and maybe have some PvP revolving around it. I'm not sure, again, just trying to read between the lines here, because they mentioned this all in very quick succession with some weird context between it that I couldn't quite find otherwise. But they still also want to add new zones and locations to the world, and they are also considering a new trade skill. Last but not least, they also mentioned that New World Aeternum now has a free trial on consoles. You can play the game for up to 4 hours for free and there are some restrictions for trading, so you can't give gold or anything to other people. But other than that, you can play the game freely, and if you choose to continue playing, then you get to keep the character that you've already started. Now, all in all, to me this roadmap is absolutely positive, mainly because I was genuinely very concerned that New World would be put in some kind of maintenance mode where it only gets the absolutely necessary updates if it doesn't perform well on console initially. Given the amount of plans that they're sharing with us at this stage, it looks promising in terms of long-term content, and as a content creator, that obviously makes me very happy. We're also seeing a strong focus on PvP in many aspects here, which of course makes me very happy, but I understand that not everyone plays the game the same way that I do, and for PvE players it seems like the content is less in comparison for a while. That is definitely how PvP has felt in the last years, so there's kind of a back and forth here, I guess, but in an ideal world obviously everyone would have something to look forward to at all times. I definitely imagine that New World will still have some dry spells in the next year, especially towards the end of seasons. I would imagine, for example, around Christmas, there will be less going on. But on the other hand, I might be able to perfectly fill exactly those gaps with Path of Exile 2, so I'm not complaining. Word of caution though. What we learned over the last few years with the New World devs is that they like having big plans and they like having big ideas, but nothing's in the game until it's in the game, and often they end up having to delay things, or things just don't make it into the game at all. And we don't know what will be the case for this roadmap here, especially with their slightly vague wording around the in development part, so I'd rather see a bit more specific things down the line and then determine based on that what I'm really gonna get excited for. The ideas the devs are bringing to the table sound very promising, and many of them are things that we've been waiting for a long time, and I really hope that they will be able to execute them according to their plan. If you want to stay updated on that, consider subscribing and clicking the bell, and if you'd like to support me further and get early trading tips in return, you can do so on my Patreon. Thanks to my patrons who already do exactly that, and thank you for watching. Sloth, out.